Welcome to the Black Gems Dive In podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into conversations about inclusive cultures and everything DEI. Your co-hosts are Akua and Kendra, and we're thrilled to be your hosts as we explore the crucial topics shaping our workplaces and communities today. In each episode, we'll unpack insights, share stories, and engage with experts to foster a deeper understanding of how we can create more inclusive environments where everyone feels valued and empowered.
Hey, Kua.
Hey, Kendra.
I'm back for another episode.
Another episode of the Black Gems Dive In podcast.
Yes. So I always be like, I never know how we start, but we just be talking, y'all. At this point, we just be talking. But
how's your week been going?
It's good. Today, as we sit here right now, it is hot in Buffalo.
It is very hot.
But you know what? I'm not complaining because this last winter was a little rough. And I also get seasonal depression. So this is like my Super Bowl. I always say that.
Yeah.
So it's nice outside.
We're also summer babies too, right?
Yes.
So like we have, Cancer. She's smiling over
I
here,
got really
y'all.
excited.
She did get excited. Her birthday's coming up first.
Yes.
And then, the Leo season comes up.
Oh, but Cancer goes before Leo.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. And we let y'all have your Cancer season.
Okay.
But anyways, it's been hot.
Yes.
But it's nice, right? Like, because I always say I'm not going to complain because what's coming.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, it's been in the 90s this week. I think it's going to continue to be that hot. We got to get outside, get some fresh air, do some golfing.
So we've been golfing, y'all. So last week I posted this on LinkedIn and some of my other socials, but I realized last week that I was out 3 times golfing last week. So I visited several golf courses. It was really nice. I really like Grover Cleveland that we went to on Friday.
That was a nice course.
It was nice. It's super condensed in the city. It's ran by the county. And so it was just really nice just to get out.
Yeah. So we did 9 holes, y'all, which was fun. Yeah. We actually did pretty well.
You did well.
Okay, I did well, but I was including you in that success, right?
I did okay the first couple holes. After that, I think I get tired mentally.
I had to warm up, I think. So by the time I warmed up and, got into the flow, and honestly, our friend Baba, who was just on the podcast, he was kind of like our coach along the way. So he was showing us some different, the chip and shot and things like that. And I was like, oh, I really do want to take lessons more consistently. So, we could try to perfect our game.
Yes. One of the biggest lessons was keep your head down.
Yes. Don't lift your head up. Keep your head down. Don't watch where the ball's going. Hit it and then look after.
Yeah, even though you may not find it.
Well, and there was a couple times that we didn't find it. And, this one didn't have any water on this course.
No. But it was nice. It was a good beginner's course, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Mm-hmm. What was the course? Oh, no, that was Glen Oaks.
Glen Oaks was very tough.
Yeah, and one of my balls did end up in the water.
Well, they said Glen Oaks is like the toughest golf course.
And it was raining.
Yes, that too.
And we were trying to play through the rain. So anyway, we are outside, y'all. We are golfing. Yeah. Having fun.
Yeah. More to come.
So we got to see what tea time is going to be this week.
Same time, same place.
Friday?
Yeah.
All right, we'll see.
Okay.
Anyways, we're going to jump into our diversity dispatch. And there's been a lot of conversations around this specific topic. And this is coming from AP News. It says that Oklahoma Supreme Court dismisses lawsuit of last Tulsa Race Massacre survivors seeking reparations. And so Wednesday, they dismissed the lawsuit by the survivors of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, dampening the hope of advocates for racial justice that the city would make financial amends for one of the worst single acts of violence against Black people in the United States history, right? It left as many as 300 people dead in a once thriving district in smoldering ruins. And so it says that the 9-member court upheld the decision made by a district court judge in Tulsa last year, ruling that the plaintiff's grievances about the destruction of the Greenwood district, although legitimate, it said, did not fall within the scope of the state's public nuisance statute. And so it said that the plaintiffs do not point to any physical injury to property in Greenwood, rendering it uninhabitable, that could be resolved by way of injunction or other civil remedy. And it said that today they're holding that the relief is not possible under any sets of facts that could be established consistent with the plaintiff's allegations. And so I know I want to say there's 3 survivors from the massacre that were, using this court case to try to get reparations. But it talked about the suit was an attempt to force the city of Tulsa and others to recompense for the destruction for the once thriving black district, and it was a white mob that overtook that district. And so in 1921, on May 31st and June 1st, the white mob, including some people hastily deputized by authorities, looted and burned the district, which was referred to as Black Wall Street. And so we often talk about Black Wall Street as this pinnacle of just a time when we saw the wealth that was created by black folks. We were building wealth. We had this thriving district. And then it was all taken away in a matter of 2 days by this mob.
Right. And I know last week when Baba was on the podcast, we talked about this a little bit about buying the block and what does that mean, and making sure that collectively we come together to create these communities. And we know that also, too, there's a lot of pushback now for reparations in general when it comes to some of the wrongdoings that were happening years ago. One thing that I recently read, I think it actually was in a movie, and you know I'm always going for a good movie, but it was the movie Origin. Which is,
okay, I did see that.
Yes, did you see the movie?
I did see that movie.
Okay, so one of the things that actually Ava DuVernay, so she was a director, and it was based off of what's her name from Warmth Under the Sun, and what's the writer's name?
You always ask me names.
I always, yes. So, but anyways, one of the quotes they said in the movie was, you know, a lot of times, especially now, there are people who are saying like, you know, I wasn't around back then when this was happening.
Yes.
And this is not my fault and I should not be punished for this or whatever the case may be. But one of the things she said was, it's almost like building a house, or it's almost like purchasing a home, right? Purchasing a home, the foundation is cracked, setting the foundation. It is your obligation to fill in those cracks. Otherwise, it's going to fall. Right. It's going to continue to crumble. And so when we're looking at a lot of these things that's happening with reparations, it is the duty and obligations of those today to kind of right those wrongdoings so that you can continue to build up communities.
And it's, I mean, I think that's a great point that you bring up, because oftentimes people are saying, oh, I had nothing to do with it. My family, you know, nobody is still alive. You have three folks. One did pass at the age of 102 last year. But two survivors of the attack, Leslie Benningfield Randall and Viola Fletcher, they're both now over 100 years old, sued in 2020 with the hopes of seeing what their attorney called justice in their lifetime. Exactly. And so oftentimes we're talking about this happened such a long time ago, but you have descendants that are still living who survived racist attacks. Yes. Right? And so it's not that long ago. This is still in our you know, our lifetime that people are now dealing with this. And so even though this lawsuit was brought up, now they're reversing it. And so they talked about some of the other cases that was used through this public nuisance law. And one of them was a big lawsuit around the opioid epidemic. Johnson. So the Johnson & Johnson opioid drug maker, they were then had to pay like what $465 million in damages, but they actually overturned that decision last year. And so all these different cases and the precedent that they're trying to use have been overturned. Yes. But then that also goes back to the conversation that we often have in terms of those local elections and how important they are. Yes. And how elections matter, because you have judges who are passing down decisions on things like this, right?
Exactly. And then also too, when you're looking at some of the things that are happening from the massacre on, you think about even going back to the conversation we had last week about generational wealth and how that's affected these families' generational wealth from businesses, right? Imagine if that didn't happen, right? Outside of the racist attacks, but imagine that didn't happen. How will these families continue that legacy, right? So there is a gap there. And so again, these are some of the repercussions that we're seeing. Some of the things are being overturned, and we just have to continue to keep pushing back and fighting the good fight. I mean, I know we say that every week.
Ooh, we tired, but you're right. You got to
continue to fight.
You got to find that. I just wanted to highlight this last thing in the article where it said that the city and insurance companies never compensated victims for their losses, and the massacre ultimately resulted in racial and economic disparities that still exist today. To your point, it also sought to detail accounting on the property and wealth lost or stolen in the massacre, and the construction of a hospital in North Tulsa, and the creation of a victims compensation fund amongst other things. And so think about, to your point, that's 1920, right? how many years, we're talking 100 years later,
Right.
where that could have been wealth that was compounding over
Yes.
time. And so now you have the loss of that opportunity for these families and that community.
Right.
Because I said it was 30 blocks.
Yes.
It spanned 30 blocks.
Yeah.
So imagine how much wealth and, you know, things could be happening now if that didn't occur.
And there's a lot of other things that we can point to in history that's similar to Tulsa. I think about most recently when I was in Boston, Beacon Hill, that community.
Yeah.
That community originally was a black community.
Yeah, yep,
right?
yep.
And now you see where it is today, kind of shifted for various reasons. Wasn't a massacre to that extent, but it shifted for various reasons. So we see places in history where literally community is being created, building the block.
Yeah.
You have all these businesses, schools, and all these different things. Not to say it can't be created again, but we have to collectively come together and put more force behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
so, you know, stay tuned on that. I know that, I don't know if there's another layer now. Like, does it then go to Supreme Court? Like, how often can you continue to, you know, challenge that?
They probably can.
You know,
they probably can.
But think about the plaintiffs, and they're 100 years old.
Yes.
So,
yeah,
you know.
I know. I
the
was
likelihood of that is questionable.
I mean, it could go to Supreme Court, right? And I was just reading something yesterday that the next, this is just a sidebar, but the next president, whoever's elected in the United States, they get to appoint 2 new Supreme Court judges. So that's just, I'm just going to leave that right there. But that's just something that I thought was interesting. I didn't even realize that. I'm like, oh, they get to appoint 2.
Yeah.
So just something to think about.
Keep that in mind, y'all.
Yes.
Definitely keep that in mind when it comes to the voting booth.
Right. Right. We have more to come on that.
Exactly.
So that was our diversity dispatch.
Yep.
So now we're going to move into our hot topic. And this is something that when we first saw, we were like, whew, this is a lot. But the article reads, House passes defense bill automatically registering men 18 to 26 for draft. And so this talks about, obviously, the draft for the military. It says the House of Representatives passed a measure on Friday, so this past Friday, automatically registering men aged 18 to 26 for selective service. It was in part of the annual National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, which set out the U.S. government's military and national security priorities over the next fiscal year. This year's NDAA authorizes $895.2 billion in military spending, a $9 billion increase from fiscal 2024. While it hasn't been invoked in over a half a century, it's mandatory for all male U.S. citizens to register for the Selective Service, also known as the military draft, when they turn 18. Failure to register is classified as a felony and comes with a host of legal challenges. So it's important to note, too, that, and we were trying to kind of dissecting what exactly this means. And before this, we were talking to Jamil about it. And he was saying that when he registered for FAFSA, or when he applied for FAFSA, financial aid for college, he also had to individually register for the draft. And then also, too, in another article that we were reading, it said that if you were eligible for any social services, you also individually have to register for the draft as well. And so this bill proposes from in the House that you automatically will be registered for the draft, which is also, again, kind of going back to some of those things that happened back when my parents, I think about my dad, he said when he was 18, he automatically was registered for the draft. So this is kind of going back to that. And it says supporters of the amendment argue that it would cut down on bureaucratic red tape and help U.S. citizens avoid unnecessary legal issues, as well as cutting down on the taxpayer dollars going towards prosecuting those cases.
And so we saw, you know, the outcry on social media that said, oh my gosh, can you, you know, what's happening? They're about to automatically enlist you into the service. And we did want to clarify, because I was a little confused when I was reading some of that and just kind of watching some of the videos. But it said that the bill would automatically register men between the ages of 18 and 25 for the Selective Service, but the bill does not automatically enlist anyone or draft anybody, right? It simply makes registration automatic instead of requiring each person to do it individually. And so one of the things that I've heard is like, okay, y'all want to make the draft, you want to automatically register people for the draft. Well, why aren't you automatically registering people to vote? Right. And so why is that not a topic of conversation? And it's interesting because I started to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the diversity in terms of who's going into the service and what that looks like, because there were a lot of measures at the government level that was peeling back diversity measures.
Right.
And I remember during Trump's presidency, remember when he banned diversity at the federal level. So as it related to government contracts and spend, you couldn't allow, diversity spends and consulting fees. Because I remember being like, well, geez, we're consultants in this space.
Right.
Now we wouldn't have the opportunity to do business with the government.
Right.
But since that has been rolled back from Ron Biden, but even then, it did not touch the military.
Right.
Like that was a space that it did not touch. And that it was very specific in saying, okay, all these other government areas, but not the military.
Right.
We still can use some diversity over here,
Right.
in terms of who's being enlisted and.
Right. Well, we also see that, and I was diving into some of the numbers as well. We also see that when it comes to black men are just going to the military at higher rates than their counterparts, right? And this is something that we look at historically. Black men and black women have always been very proud to represent the U.S., right? We see that back in the day, even though there was racism and segregation that, of course, they're facing on the home front. And so this is just a narrative that's repeating itself as well, right? And so you enlist into the military, but you're also battling these things here.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But to your point, right? They always want to continue to diversify, use air quotes, the military, right?
Yeah.
And putting some of us on the front lines.
And I think it's interesting because I was recently, and I don't remember what it was, but I was listening to someone talk about how in a certain school district, and I think this was in Indiana, they were looking at kids and like their higher education trajectory. So maybe, there's less diversity as it related to going to higher ed, so college after graduating from high school. And there were a lot of students of color that were going the service route and enlisting because, there are benefits that come with that, right? Don't you get like healthcare for the rest of your life, access to healthcare? You also, there's a specific bill that helps you with home ownership or pays your tuition. There's a lot of benefits on that.
I will say this too. So the GI Bill, I think is what you're referring to. The GI Bill, however, and this is from experience from just my brother, right? My brother was military Air Force for 13 years. And when he came back, he did several stints in Afghanistan, Iraq. But when he came back to use the GI Bill for his education, there was so much red tape.
Oh, okay.
It was so much red tape, even utilizing healthcare benefits, there was so much red tape, right?
Okay.
And so even though they say, well, here you go, it takes years to kind of recoup some of those things, right? And so a lot of people, especially when they come back from the military, mentally, it's a struggle to just reassimilate back to the real world. And so mentally, a lot of them just kind of fall to the wayside because they don't have the services immediately when they come out of the military. And
that's always been insane to me, especially from a healthcare perspective, because we know, there's long wait times for things like, going through VA, right? And trying to access to your benefits as you're talking about. But it always is interesting to me about how much we promote, like, serving the country. And, we all are thankful to our veterans for what they've sacrificed. But at the same time, they come home and have a lot of these different issues.
Yes.
They're facing a lot of issues when they come home. Right. So I say all that to say, this is going to be interesting. We'll see what happens. People, I don't know if it's going to be passed or not. The bill specifically.
Some people say it won't be passed in the Senate, just the way it's set up right now. Obviously, it was passed in the House, but obviously with this upcoming presidential election, the House may reintroduce it. A couple months down the line. So we have to continue to watch what that looks like.
Yeah. So more to come.
More to come. I feel like every time we go through
we always got more to come.
We always just like take a deep breath. Like I know it's a lot. And I know a couple weeks ago we talked about Uncle Nearest and celebrating. And so it's just like we got to do some uplifting things too.
I think the other part to think about too is just there's so much that's happening on a day-to-day that it gets to a point where people start to become apathetic around what's happening, right? It's just so much to bear, so much to hold, and you can only deal with so much information at a time too, right? So we talk about, especially in the DEI space, we often talk about cognitive fatigue.
Yes.
You can only deal with so much at a time, functionally deal with it, right? And so we get to this point where I don't know if I can handle another story that talks about some of the things that we bring up, but at the same time, we got to keep our finger on the pulse.
We do. And I also encourage and employ people to read beyond the tagline, read behind the headline. because even when it came to the military stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, 18-year-olds are automatically going to be drafted. And it is, it is a headliner. It's something to watch out for, but we also have to continue to read behind the headline. And it's our job and responsibility to bring this information to our listeners. So it's a lot, but we're going to keep doing it.
It is a lot, right? And so we're going to go into our next topic of conversation. And this is really dealing on a topic that we've had conversations around, right? And so it's talking about what is the next phase of DEI? What does that look like? And this is actually coming from an article on Unheard. And it says, could MEI replace DEI? And so MEI is an AI firm that's out of Silicon Valley with groundbreaking innovation. They're talking about hiring based on merit instead of race. And so MEI, which would replace DEI, stands for Merit, Excellence, and Intelligence. And the CEO of this app says that we do not unfairly stereotype, tokenize, or otherwise treat anyone as a member of a demographic group rather than as an individual. Right.
And so when we talk about, MEI and merit and legacy and all these different things, it goes back to even the conversation. I mean, this is an AI group out of Silicon Valley, and we know a lot of these conversations are happening out of Silicon Valley. Just even recently, last week when you were on the panel discussion, for the gentleman from Squire, and how the conversation around diversity and what that looks like in merit versus DEI. But even going back to months ago and even last year when Alaskan Airlines, for example, when the door fell off of Alaskan Airlines, and there was a particular person who said, who was a CEO of a company, who said, if they weren't focusing so much on diversity instead of merit, this wouldn't happen. Right. So these conversations are popping up on a constant basis. But, continuing to talk about tokenization, talking about merit, and even going back to last year when we first, I don't know if it was last year or the beginning of this year, when we started talking about affirmative action and what that looks like, we knew affirmative action was going to have this trickle-down effect. And now we're seeing it. We're seeing it. So when we talk about legacy and all those different things. So interested to continue to dive into this too. And so when he, was discussing this MEI, it said that meritocracy at scale. It talked about some of the fundraising that they had going on within their organization. And it talked about how he spent a lot of his time in recruitment, and he either personally was interviewing every hire to sign off on them, but he said that he spent so much time on it that now he wants everyone to adopt this mind frame of MEI. And so it says that hiring on merit will be a permanent policy at scale. This is the company. And it says that it's a big deal whenever we invite someone to join our mission. And those decisions have never been swayed by orthodoxy or virtue signaling, or whatever the constant or current thing is. I think of our guiding principle as MEI, merit, excellence, and intelligence. And that means that we're only hiring the best person for the job. They're seeking out and demanding excellence and unapologetically preferring people who are very smart. It also talks about them treating everyone as an individual, and not unfairly stereotyping, tokenizing, or otherwise treating anyone rather than an individual. And so it kind of keeps going on, and he then kind of relates this back to saying that there's a mistaken belief that meritocracy somehow conflicts with diversity, and he strongly disagrees on that. He says that no group has a monopoly on excellence. A hiring process based on merit will naturally yield a variety of backgrounds, perspectives, and ideas. Achieving this requires casting a wide net for talent and then objectively selecting the best without bias in any direction. We will not pick winners and losers based on someone being the right or wrong race, gender, and so on. It should be needless to say, and yet it needs saying, doing so would be racist and sexist, not to even mention illegal. It's so much to unpack there. So much to unpack here. And one of the things about when he's saying objectively selecting the best without bias in any direction inherently is biased. Right? Because best is very subjective. Right? What is the best? What is that criteria? Are you basing that off of your previous roles? Are you basing that off of what schools you went to?
Exactly.
Like, what does best mean? So that is inherent subjectivity means that there's bias in there.
And I think that's the larger point there too, right? Like when we're having these different conversations, it's saying that meritocracy, he's saying that it got us to where we are today, right? And that it's going to be the same thing that'll get us where we're going as we embark on our next chapter. And he's talking about it from that perspective. But he's saying upholding meritocracy is good for business and it's the right thing to do. And the approach not only results in the strongest possible team, but also ensures they're treating colleagues with fairness and respect. But I think one of the biggest issues in this is we talk about often the myth of meritocracy.
Yes.
There's really no such thing as meritocracy in the way that people are trying to present it to be, right? Like everyone has had a hand in getting some help, support to getting them to where they're at, but not everyone has the same fair advantage and starting point.
Right. It goes back to the foundations of DEI, and we've talked about from day one, right? Where people are saying, I pulled myself up from my own bootstraps. But again, what if people don't have boots? What if people don't have literally bootstraps, whatever the case may be, right? To your point, everyone has a different starting point. And I think about even going back to just legacy and what that means for even college admissions, right? So a lot of times when you think about, even for me, right, I am a proud Colgate alum, right? And I know that Colgate University holds a lot of weight in a lot of rooms, right? And when I was deciding of what schools to go to, some of the conversations that I had with my parents, right, my parents were having with me is, what school also too is going to pull the most weight in rooms, right? What's going to get you into a job after you finish your 4 years? These are conversations, right? I mean, when you look at the Yales and the Harvards or even some of the Ivy League schools and what that looks like, we know that once you're a part of some of these schools, right, you automatically get into this good old boys club or whatever the case, and people look out for you, right? So you're talking about merit in these roles, and sometimes we talk about this all the time. People get into these roles based off of who you know, and then they get promoted. Legacy. They get promoted. We're like, how you get here?
Exactly, and it's because your Uncle Jim, or cousin Tony or whoever is the one who is pulling you into these different spaces. Right. And so to kind of reflect that, I think this other Forbes article, and it's written by Katie McPhee, and it says that the dangerous myth of meritocracy persists and how it hurts women. And so she goes on to talk about how she initiated conversations with her CEO about maybe hiring more women in higher roles. And he responded that he would never intentionally hire a woman or anyone else because the company was based on a meritocracy. They only focus on hiring the best candidates, regardless of race or gender. And so she said at that time she took the comment as face value, but wondered why the best candidate it never seemed to be a woman in this case. And so she later learned that her CEO adopted this ideology from the tech scene in Silicon Valley. And this is what we keep leaning in. We keep leaning in. This is what we've been talking about. Because it seems
like they're setting the precedent in some of these companies, right?
Right. And so she talked about that the idea is that the best talent rises to the top regardless of politics, race, gender. Everyone has equal opportunity to prove themselves and be successful. It's a great idea, she says, except it's a myth. And so she talks about countless articles. There's been a lot of research around this as well, that there's a lot of companies that are claiming to be meritocracies, but employees are not hired and promoted on merit alone. Instead, privilege and bias play a real role, and women and people of color are left behind. And so it says part of the reason for this is that hiring decisions are often made based on proxies for aptitude, which may include the hiring manager's own gut feel or a focus on culture fit. And we talk about this in the DEI space all the time, right? Like cultural fit is based on your own, your gut, which is your own bias.
Your own bias, exactly. And so if you have a company that's founded by all males or all males at the top, you're going to see that culture kind of trickling down into the hiring practices and things like that. And this is why we say when we're looking at DEI training or we're looking at culture, a lot of times too, it happens when it comes to that middle management, right? That middle management is really the team that set forth that culture. And if they don't eliminate their bias, or if they're getting that from the top, right, and it's based off of all males, you won't see those women in those middle, or in those positions, right? So it does inherently have bias towards women or any other marginalized group.
Exactly.
Right.
And so there's more studies that she cited in her paper that she wrote, and it talked about how oftentimes under the guise of meritocracy, white men promote more white men. And so it was a study done where they used the same exact credentials, except the difference was a woman and a man, and the man would almost always, 9 times out of 10, hire the man in that case, right, and not the woman. So as much as you want to say that, and shoot, we've been a part of different hiring practices and, you know, conversations around hiring. And at the end of the day, I've seen it myself. I've seen it myself where people will say different things like, oh, well, you know, this person went to this school. I think we've talked about it before. I had a CEO who would only hire interns from a certain private school, right? Or there would be, oh, well, they don't really fit the role in terms of what I think it should look like.
Right.
But if you've only seen white men as CEOs, then maybe that's what you think it should look like. You're not going to see a woman or a person of color or a person with disability in that specific role.
And that's why when you talk about mentoring, right, you're going back to mentor someone that is almost the complete opposite as you, right?
Yes.
Who is not aligned when it comes to schools, when it's not aligned to, quote unquote, your whatever you deem as a culture fit. We talk about this all the time when it comes to the mentoring piece and the sponsorship piece. And going back to even what you had just talked about of putting someone in position based off of, I've only, you know, going to hire based off of this school or whatever the case may be. There's another Forbes article that talked about legacy admissions, in which it says legacy preferences or legacy admissions refers to the practice when children or grandchildren of alumni are more likely to gain admission into a particular school. So 2018 survey by Inside Higher Ed reported that 42% of private universities and 6% of public universities practice this policy. Of the more than 700 colleges and universities that consider candidates legacy status, is the institutions with an admit rate of less than 25% where the practice is most common. A recent study by Harvard economists found that legacy applicants were nearly 4 times as likely to be admitted than non-legacy applicants with similar test scores and grades.
Wow.
Right? And so it's already competitive to get into these schools, right?
Yeah.
And so it's almost like these legacy families supersede just the general population, right? Which we know to be true.
Right.
Right. So when you're talking about the myth of meritocracy, it is a myth.
It's a myth, and it's a challenge right now because, you know, DEI is under attack, and we talk about this. That's why we do the diversity dispatch and have these conversations. But it's under attack, and now it almost seems like it's a cool thing to be against DEI. Oh, why wouldn't we hire based on intelligence and smarts and all these other things? But then we see the biases that then are impacted even in our technology. We've talked about that.
Yes.
If you don't have people who have different experiences, the facial recognition, I think we mentioned the last time, where you're not even seeing people of color in the same way to unlock your iPhone or, you know, do things like that. And so we have to diversify in order to really think about other folks and how this could implement and work for other people that are not white, who are not men, you know, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times too, people are relying on folks to kind of rest on their own morals and values that they think they have, right? And I will say that, right? Like people, I hope that they have these morals and values, but again, these biases come into play, right? And so there are folks who say, like, I don't want to be, you know, I've heard it from Black people, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be put into this box. I don't want to be the diversity check box. I don't want to be the affirmative action hire or whatever the case may be, right? So you hear it from that angle as well. And so you have all this at play and people are saying, I just want good people.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, that's what they wholeheartedly believe, but their bias comes into play.
Well,
right? Who define good, right? It's very subjective.
Right.
So you need to put these parameters in place in order to check those biases when it comes to admissions, when it comes to hiring practices. And I think that most companies, they want to do well. Obviously, they want to hit their margins and all these other things, but you can't do that unless you diversify.
Yeah.
You're going to be left behind.
Right. And that's really the reality, because we always say we're becoming a plurality nation. There's not going to be a single ethnic or racial majority in the country. And that's already happening in a lot of places. But one of the things that I often think about, too, is how the system is working, how it was designed.
Yes.
And so in order to challenge these different biases, in order to challenge, okay, what is a culture fit? What is smart in your realm? Like, you know, what does that look like? How does that show up? We have to start to think about the system as a whole, right? And putting things in place so that it checks those biases at the systems level. Right. Because people are still hiring. And if we know that people have biases and you're entering into your own, you know, space with those biases, then that's never going to change, right? It
goes back to the conversation we had a couple episodes ago about target universalism, right? And really looking at the system and how it's helping and benefiting everyone and not just one key player. So again, when we're talking about looking at DEI and kind of reframing this to make it digestible for people now in 2024, it really is this concept of target universalism and how can a company or a school or whatever the case may be really look at how can we benefit as a whole to really thrive, right? Because if you continue to now base things off of merit or MEI or whatever the case may be, we're going to be having this conversation once again 4 years from now, 8 years from now, and people are going to be like, I don't know how I'm going to challenge, make my company better. Well, we told you what the blueprint was 4 years ago.
That's very true. And I think, like, I know we've mentioned this in the past too, right? Like from a systems level approach, because I think targeted universalism also can reach this specific space when you think about companies, right? And so one of the things that I think about is when I was overseeing HR, we had a practice where we would look at everyone's performance evaluation and make sure that there was consistency across what that looked like. And we found there were issues, there was inequities, there's discrepancies, all these different things within the process, because a manager would write the same exact phrase for two different employees, but score them differently.
Right.
And then we would flag it and say, hey, just to let you know, you wrote the same thing, but you scored. Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I did that, right? Because they're looking at it through their own lens.
Right.
How do you feel about this person today versus, what their performance was the last 6 months? There's always going to be room for biases in these different processes. So how are we going to combat that? We have to look at systems and put things in place that check that.
Exactly. Like even I think about the word excellence. Excellence is subjective too.
Sure.
Right? All of it is subjective. And I think a lot of times people are now taking out, I think when I look at this, right, a lot of people are even taking out not the word diversity, but the equity piece is really what's being challenged, right? Because equity is the hardest part of this whole DEI framework, in my opinion. And so people are replacing this equity word for excellence or whatever the case may be. So if you have excellence is the standard, excellence is what we're achieving, what does that mean? What does that look like for everyone?
I mean, honestly, it's just being used as this...
yes.
We know that what it's being used for, right?
Like
it's being used to challenge diversity, equity, inclusion, and say, oh, well, why wouldn't we just hire? Because even in the article from the CEO, the tech CEO, he started to talk about Martin Luther King and, we need to judge people based on the content of their character, et cetera. But we know that, yes, it sounds great over here, but why did Dr. Martin Luther King do what he had to do? Because there was inequities, and we were fighting for, that centering and that footing. So I don't know.
Yeah, I know. So it's like, I keep talking about this, but I feel like we're going to continue to have these same conversations because as we keep talking about the pendulum is shifting this way, at some point in time, it's going to have to come back this way again, right? And what does that look like? And I think even when you're talking about going back to just culture fit and this next generation behind us is like, I'm not dealing with this.
Child.
We keep talking about it, but they're not dealing with it, right? And so these companies are going to have to figure it out. Right. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. And we'll keep, giving the folks the information and putting this stuff out there. But, it's our next segment.
Oh, the segment we always struggle over, but,
It's the gem of the day.
The gem of the day.
Right? What's your gem?
My gem, I think about just... in general. So I've been on this health journey and, I've been struggling a little bit, right, in terms of what I want my next goal to be. Okay. And for me, I'm a person where I'm very numbers driven. I mean, I think we're both like data driven, right? And by this date, we need to hit this goal and this goal and this goal. But I would say one win that I had recently in the gym, and I don't know if people are familiar with this, but box jumps, right? So historically, I have not been able to do box jumps since college, really, because I have bad knees and all that other stuff. So I've just been doing step up, step down, simple things. But recently in the gym, I was able to do consistent box jumps for about 45 seconds, right? So 2 rounds, 45 seconds consistently, and was like, I could keep going, right? And so I equate that to really looking at what are those wins that you may not necessarily be on I just repeated myself, but what are those wins that necessarily aren't, that you can't track, right? Those that are not necessarily on a sheet of a paper to say, I've lost this way, I lost that way, right? What are those wins that you can still track, but not necessarily going back to your weight loss goal.
Yeah.
And so for me, because I've been kind of struggling on what the next weight loss goal is for myself, that piece has been like a win for myself. And I'm like, you know what? I'm good. I just wanted to like dance going out the gym or whatever the case may be. But I guess all that to say is like my gym is really just to keep going.
Yeah.
So even if you can't see the number change on a scale, even if you can't see, you know, necessarily like your clothes fitting right, what are those non-scale victories that you can point to and say, I did that, and then pat on the back? So I guess that's like my gym.
I think that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you've been very consistent, you know what I mean? You've been at it, you've been, you know, kind of checking those boxes and getting to that point. But there does become a time where your body's just like, all right, you know, this has been great, but we're going to stay here for a little bit. And so even kind of looking at those non-scale victories and saying, okay, I can do X. I used to not be able to do a push-up. Now I can do a push-up. I can do a pull-up. I can do a box jump, right? And so you're still seeing that progression happen. And so, you know,
those non-scale victories, man.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I'm more excited for that than any other
But that's
victory.
also because it's still progress. And I think that's the biggest thing, right?
Like, and my knees don't hurt.
Child, box jumps and knees. You said the box jumps. I said, ooh, you got them young knees.
Listen, you about to say mega knees.
I was gonna say mega knees, but you got them young knees. Yeah. So I think my gem of the day, I'm thinking about just, you know, being a business owner comes with all types of highs, lows. You know, there's some times where you feel like, oh yes, I got this. There's other times where I'm like, child, I'm so over this.
I'm looking at Kua's eyes. I know what she's trying
exactly.
to say, like,
right? Like it's a challenge. But I would say that more often than not, you find yourself sometimes in spaces where people think you have all the answers. And I'm just coming to a place where I'm a lot more comfortable and confident saying I don't know, right? And also asking questions, even if they are considered dumb questions. I'm now trying to get more information and insight because, you know, there's a lot of things that we learn after the fact. Even when I'm hiring someone who is supposed to be a specialist in this area and I'm trusting that they're going to be able to do what they said they're going to do, I'm now finding, oh, guess what? You missed out on this opportunity as a business owner, or you should have did this, or you should have did that. And I'm like, well, damn, I thought I hired somebody to be able to navigate this. But now I'm just finding myself in this position and place where it's like, okay, you got to forgive yourself because you're not going to know everything. You have to give yourself grace, but then also not be afraid to ask dumb questions or ask questions that, you know, people might think you should know. And so I'm kind of in that space right now. I'm also looking at a lot of folks who are just non-traditional folks that you can talk to and say, how did you navigate this specific space, or what did you do to get there? And so, my gem is to be unapologetic about asking questions and getting the help and support you need. Because this journey as an entrepreneur and business owner and other people are relying on salaries. Based on what decisions I make is a lot of pressure. You know what I mean? And so finding comfort in being able to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out, you know?
When you were talking, it makes me think about, first of all, I think you should write a book. That's just me.
It's on my list.
Okay. List. I think you should write a book. But I think about Michelle Obama with her book Becoming, and she had a journal along with it, and she had put out the journal because someone said, well, how do you remember all this stuff, right? All the things that you went through in life. And she had a journal that prompted, like, help you all these, like, you know, these prompts to put all this information in. And so I think, like, maybe 5 to 7 years down the line, you have a story to tell. But you will have a story to tell. But just even, like, continue to write those anecdotal stories. Like, just write some of the things you're talking about. What does vulnerability look like in this moment? How did you come up with this decision? I think that'll be very empowering to folks. Right. And you can you'll have a story to tell.
It's interesting you say that because I actually started a business journal. Separate from my personal journal, and it is me accounting for things that I'm kind of navigating now, things that I wish I knew, you know, mistakes that I've definitely made where I'm like, oh, I'm an S Corp as a business. I should have been able to take advantage of this, but guess what? My accountant probably should have gave me the nod on that, right? So the other thing that I would say in that space is there's oftentimes, and we talk about diversity and inclusion and kind of, you know, making space for other people and pulling up folks as you know, are going to that next level. But I will say that some of the advice has come from allies, white allies specifically, who are looking out and saying, hey, did you know that this benefit existed as a tax write-off
Yep.
or as this or as that? And it's
Yep.
just like, I did not know.
Yep.
But thank you for letting me know. So now I can take advantage of that because, you know, how many of us are aware of this stuff?
Yeah,
We're not.
And you're in rooms where you're able to hear this information, right? And so there's a lot of us who are not.
Exactly.
Who are not invited
Exactly.
into these rooms.
Exactly.
And so we have to continue to share that knowledge.
Right. And so sharing is caring, y'all. We're gonna continue to share.
Yes.
But yeah, ask questions, be vulnerable about the things you don't know, you know, and share with community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll end it on that.
All right.
Before we do end it on that though, like, subscribe.
Yes.
We got all these different segments and we're like, wait, what do we gotta do again?
Yes. Like, subscribe, and share.
And share.
And comment.
And
Please comment. Yes. And comment on the amazing things that we talk about.
Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, continue to watch out for some content.
All the platforms. So thanks for tuning in, y'all. Another episode.
Yeah.
See y'all next time.
All right.
Peace.
Bye.